Thank you, David. Okay, and now we proceed to the corporate governance model discussion, Director Primacy Model versus Shareholder Empowerment Model. And we have now Blanaid Clarke here to present the subject. So Blanaid, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that two of the last speakers mentioned that the EU may be the possible source or solution to some of the problems. And I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit of a party pooper in that respect, because my speech is based in the idea that not only is this unlikely to happen, but actually it may be even worse than that, and some of the changes which are being introduced may not be helpful to the sustainable company agenda. And I say that because the focus of the EU, and again based on the 2012 action plan, but also on the 2011 Green Paper, is very much on shareholder empowerment, involving shareholder engagement. And they see that in terms of dialogue, they see that in terms of monitoring, and also they see it in terms of voting. And my take on that is that shareholders may not be the best possible people to look after this particular important area. And I'll explain why. Some of these issues have already been dealt with. But the first thing is that when we talk about shareholders, we used to talk about them as owners, and they're not really owners. We have to lose that idea. When we think of owners, we think of, we own our car or we own our house, and it's something that we have an investment in and we care about and we're involved with. That's not the way shares operate anymore. And as was referred to this morning, the holding period for shares is quite different. About 70% of US equities are now traded on the basis of hyper-speed trading, high-frequency trading. And so you're talking about somebody dealing not because there's a good policy in terms of sustainability or long-term value, but because the algorithms tell them to deal. That's not useful to us. Shareholdings tend to be more internationalised, and that's having an impact. And again, that was very clear in the UK in the Cadbury case when there was a proposal to acquire the company. And one of the issues was how this was going to affect local employment, how this was going to affect an icon. And the question was, well, the majority of shareholders who were making the decision were international shareholders who were less troubled by issues like that. There are less individual shareholders than there used to be. In the 60s, there were about 54% individual shareholders. By 2011, the figure was down to 11%. I think has already been indicated. In the EU or US or in the that figure is UK, individual shareholding. So they're not a homogeneous bunch in terms of risk appetite. The focus has been very much on long-term investing, and we see that again in the UK in terms of the K report. But what are they talking about in terms of long-term investing? They're talking 20 years. They're not talking, 2,100, the figure we're talking about. So when you try and persuade shareholders that this is something that's important, it's not important to the majority of them. It's not even within the long-term range. Again, if we look at their past record in terms of the global financial crisis, there was no market discipline in terms of the banks. They didn't call a halt. They didn't do the right thing. And again, all the reports suggest actually it was worse than that. The shareholders and their drive for short-term profit actually pushed it and pushed managers and companies and directors into taking the wrong action. Are these the people we want to entrust this important objective with? So and I appreciate it's a cynical view, but if all they're concerned about is share price, we need to incentivize them to be involved in this. So we need to make this matter in a way that hits the bottom line. And possibly one of the ways of doing that is to view this as a reputational risk. And again, risk management is very much to the fore, and one of the highest ranked risks in terms of impact is reputational risk, and a study by Forbes in the last couple of weeks has indicated that. So how does this become a reputational issue? We see how it does post facto after a crisis, BP, after the Horizon spill. That's very clear, but we need to make it an issue before something happens. Good practice, the type of thing that you can see and that makes a difference. And there you're talking about benchmarking. Benchmarking good practices and who might do this. Social media will be really important in this context because, again, in terms of reputational, social media will drive it. Another problem is that the EU are increasing the amount of disclosure, and Andrew referred to the amendment to the 4th and 7th Accounting Directive, which is dealing with non-financial risks and requiring a statement in terms of policy and strategy and an implementation of environmental risks. So more information. And again, what's the value of more information? Grant Thornton in the UK did a study of annual reports, and in the last 3 years, they've grown in size by 16%, 16.5%. Who is reading this material? Is it enough to just say, well, look, we've looked after our sustainability checklist because we have disclosed it? If you look at the risk metrics study that was done in 2009 for the European Commission, again, they talked about disclosure. The majority of institutional investors, 2/3 of them, said that disclosure was insufficient. What did they do about it? Nothing. Why aren't they doing something? Again, it's partly incentives, but also it's a question of resources. They do not have the resources to deal with this. Again, there was a fascinating line in the risk metrics report. They talked about surveying 1,000 institutional investors with a questionnaire. You know how many responded? 100. That's surprising. The reason they gave for not responding was just phenomenal. They said that they didn't have the resources and or the expertise to answer the questionnaire in terms of shareholder engagement, never mind engaging. So again, this is an issue. There are new ideas coming forward, and again, in the UK, there's an idea of a stewardship code, which you can have different views on. But one of the issues in that is that there would be an investors forum, that there would be a small number of strong institutional investors who would set an agenda, who would have subcommittees of engagement groups who would deal with issues. Now, again, the view in the UK is that this is of mixed value. They're saying, how are you ever going to get these guys to agree? You know, there's so many issues. They'll have their own agendas, some of the issues we've talked about before. They won't usefully agree. And that may be the case in terms of certain issues like pay. I actually think that sustainability and environmental issues is one of the issues where you may get agreement and where something like that may be useful and they may drive it. Probably the last issue in relation to whether they're going to be active or not, I wanted to mention is the whole idea of acting in concert. And this is one of the issues which was addressed in the recent review of the Takeover Directive. And the argument was institutional investors would be involved if they weren't just so afraid of being found to be acting in concert, and therefore having to make a mandatory bid. So if you remove that, honestly, they'll really get active. They'll be involved. Again, I doubt that. There's been movement on that. ESMA has issued a paper setting out what constitutes acting in concert, and if you like, reassuring institutional investors that the sort of active leadership role we're looking for will not lead to a triggering of the mandatory bid rule. Again, in terms of changes, and Andrew won't be surprised to hear me say it, but I disagree with them in terms of a change coming in that direction from the EU. I would be extraordinarily surprised if the EU directive box was opened again. It was difficult enough to close it the last time, and I really don't see that opening, and there's no indication in the report. Okay, the last thing to mention, how am I doing time-wise? Am I okay? Yeah, 1 minute, okay, 1 minute to tell you. Managerial, so I actually think director primacy and giving directors responsibility here is more likely to be successful. And again, the EU is focusing on this. Importantly, they're focusing on things that will be advantageous to the sustainability agenda. They're talking about independence on boards. And again, empirical evidence suggests greater independence on board, better for environmental performance. Greater emphasis on expertise, on diversity. Again, we have a new proposal for greater gender balance on boards. And that's useful for the sustainability agenda, again, because statistically, these are issues where a more diverse board, and particularly more women on a board, is advantageous. I would agree with all the other commentators who said we need to allow or enable directors to take into account the wider environmental interests. They can't really now. I think it has to be in the form of a duty, but I think we need to tread carefully on this one. I think it should be a duty to respect. I do think that there should be a degree of accountability, something which is lacking in a lot of directors' duties. I would see that, again, like my colleagues, I would see that as an agency who would look after this, who would ensure that if there were breaches in terms of this particular duty, that they were dealt with. I don't see it as a civil suit. And I think you have to bear in mind it is difficult to get high-quality directors, and you want to ensure that this is a reasonable question we're asking of them and a reasonable job that we're giving them. Thank you.